Welcome, everyone. It is 1:30, and I see that people are still logging in. So we'll give just a minute, 1 minute or two before we get started, so we can get maximum number of people. We're up to about 80, and we had over 200 people sign up. So let's just give a 1 minute or two, and we'll go ahead and get started. We're approaching 100 online. 30 seconds, we'll start. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Chris Nani. I'm president of the Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham, and we are excited to be offering this webinar in partnership with the Alabama Association of Nonprofits. In February, right after the president issued the initial round of executive orders, AAN held a virtual town hall meeting for nonprofits to provide information and support during this period of fear and uncertainty. And a month later, the Community Foundation held a webinar with legal advisors called Making Sense of the Executive Orders. Both of our organizations are committed to providing support to nonprofits, particularly during this time of uncertainty. For this reason, we've teamed together to provide today's webinar entitled Navigating Change, featuring the perspective of funders with representation from our community foundation, a family foundation, and corporate foundation. The only thing that I would add is that, the federal government has historically been the major supporter of our nation's safety net. If you saw the one-page graphic that Danielle Dunbar from AAN emailed in the invitation, and she's going to bring it up and show you that when she talks, it shows that the federal and local governments spend close to $700 billion a year through nonprofits. And this is in comparison to $265 billion by individuals and only $44 billion by foundations. Therefore, all individual and foundation giving adds up to less than half of what government gives. Now, I've heard people say, well, if federal funding gets cut, foundations are going to have to step up and fill the void. But when you look at the facts, there is no way that $44 billion can replace $700 billion. So please keep this in mind during the discussion this afternoon. At this point, I want to turn it over to Danielle Dunbar, the Executive Director of the Alabama Association of Nonprofits. She'll introduce our panelists and lead today's discussion. And then following the discussion, we'll have Ryan Hankins from PARCA, who will discuss a potential study that we're looking to undertake, which demonstrates the important role that the nonprofit sector plays in our overall economy. Thank you all again for participating today. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Danielle.
Great, Chris. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with everybody today. I'm super grateful for everyone on our panel, especially grateful for Chris and for Gus as we began to have conversations about what things may look like down the road. I think it is incredibly important for nonprofit community to come together, to be listening to each other, to talk together, to learn together, so that we can creatively solve for problems that may be headed towards us. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Chris referenced this infographic that was sent out to many of you in your invitation to join the webinar, but also in a survey to the Alabama Association of Nonprofits members. So like many of you, since January, the understanding that funding could be frozen, that the budget for nonprofits would be cut, I really started thinking, where's the money coming from? Where does it go? What might this look like? So for all of you, I know you're thinking the same thing. And just to orient you to the conversation today and to this infographic, up at the top, you will see some different circles or pies. Those show some of the funding sources that Chris was mentioning. You can see the big federal government one at $491 billion. The circles or pies at the bottom are nonprofit organizations, so kind of divided up by subsector. And this is just a really interesting, if not very busy way of understanding how all the money flows through the nonprofit economy. And we certainly are interested in understanding what that's like here in Alabama. And so we started off, as I said, with a survey. We sent to some members of AAN, the Community Foundation sent to some folks that they're in conversation with. And the questions that you all had, not surprisingly, were, what happens to the funding? What is this going to look like? So I am going to stop sharing this. And before I introduce the panel, yeah, go ahead.
Well, there was a request in the chat to share the image full screen, but we might be ready to move past that.
Oh, I can share it full screen one more time.
Well, also you can just email it out, Danielle, afterwards so that everybody has it again.
I'll send it to y'all. You can see the big thing. It is a lot to study, and we're not going to dive into all of it. Anyway, just to make the point, there have certainly been federal funding cuts. Today, arts organizations, humanities organizations, environmental organizations, even housing and economic development organizations have lost federal funding here in Alabama. There was a study done by Urban Institute, published in February, but with 2023 data. And just to give you a sense of things, about 2,000 of Alabama's nonprofits, that's about 34% of our active nonprofits, receive federal funding. And then that funding made up about 28% of their budgets. That was on average, so a little over a quarter of their budget. So when that starts to disappear, we are talking about big impacts. So let's talk about foundations and the new kind of environment that we are all in. And let's move to our panel because they are tremendous experts and really wonderful thought leaders. So I'm not going to go into deep bios, but we have with us today Carol Butler, who's the executive director of the Mike and Gillian Goodrich Foundation. We have Tim King, who is the relationship manager. Did I say that right? Manager of community relations. Sorry, with Blue Cross Blue Shield Corporate Giving, and then the Caring Foundation, and then of course Gus Hurd-Hughes, who's the senior VP of programs at Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham. They have great bios. They're really knowledgeable. I will just say they have been around, have experienced the Great Recession of 2008, COVID, many things that have caused some interesting things to happen for the nonprofit sector. And I just welcome them all here today. We're thrilled to have you. And I'm going to get to the Q&A. Before I ask the first one, I will say if you have a question that pops into your mind, please put it in the chat. Chris said he would be monitoring that. We'll take time later to address those. If he thinks he needs to interrupt us, he's welcome to do that. So my panel, the first question to you is, how are private, corporate, and community foundations responding to the changing landscape? Will you be changing priorities to meet urgent needs, similar to how many funders did in COVID? How will federal cuts affect your funding to nonprofits? And I'm just going to let y'all self-select. Come off mute. And
I'd be happy to step forward. From the private foundation side, or at least from this private foundation side, we are not necessarily changing priorities. We've spent a good portion of this first part of the year checking in with grantees about their exposure to federal dollars, whether it comes straight from the federal government or through the state, trying to just get a handle on who's being severely impacted, who's being partially impacted, who's coming away at least somewhat unscathed. And so we've, our conversations really have, what we've learned from a lot of those conversations is just that there is a lot of variety into the amount of exposure a lot of our longtime nonprofit partners are feeling or have. We do not right now intend to change any of our funding priorities. We don't see this in the same way, I guess, that we saw COVID. Our priorities changed in COVID because we generally don't fund in health and human services. And that was such a big part of the COVID era. And we did change a lot of priorities to try to meet those needs, but we don't see this quite in the same way. We do think that, I anticipate that by year end, we may have to review how we're spending funds so that some of our long-term partners that we funded for a long time who have big exposure to federal dollars may need more support than we had counted on. So that is a possibility. But right now, we're more in a cautious wait and see. I think that, the situation is so fluid and it changes so frequently that it's hard for us to know right now, any of us to know right now, what the real impact is going to be. And so we're more in a, let's see where we are in September and later in the year and how things have really started to flesh out. So that's kind of our stance.
Thank you, Carol. Pam or Gus, go ahead.
Sure, I can jump in. I would say similar to the Goodrich Foundation, maybe with some slight differences when you get down to the details. We are always attuned to what's going on in our community and what's changing and how we may need to adjust. I came to the foundation in 2011 when we were involved in tornado recovery, which was certainly a big shift in our focus and approach. I was here through the COVID crisis and all the changes then. I agree this is different in character, but I would say we are early this year, we made a commitment to keep our ear to the ground, talk to our partners, talk to partners like AAN that are kind of looking at the bigger picture and try to understand what's going on as things unfold and to be open and ready for change if we need to. So far, I would say in our first cycle, which opened in January, our spring cycle, that was pretty early on. And we did, in the course of that cycle, because we got a record number of applications, our committee decided to cap our largest grant of $50,000, which is lower than we typically do. And I think the current circumstances had something to do with the demand and the need that we were seeing. But that was just kind of particular to that cycle. I will say ahead of our fall cycle, which opens at the end of July, we are having a lot of conversations and sort of processing what we heard in the first cycle and have just been hearing from partners. And one thing, this is a little bit, we definitely are not changing our priorities, which are kind of rooted in our strategic plan, our 5 priorities for grant making. But we are thinking about sort of how we make decisions and how we evaluate proposals. And I think one thing, we're hearing is for some organizations, a strategic approach may not be how do we expand or even enhance a particular program, but how do we adjust to these current circumstances? And there may actually be a scaling back for a period of time in their work. And so we have to sort of understand organization strategies in that context and take that into account. So I would say we're still processing that. We're trying to assess, kind of concretely what we'll do ahead of our next cycle. But we're in a period of a lot of change and uncertainty.
Yeah, the two of them were well spoken, and I think I share a lot of what y'all had to say. For us, we're not changing our priorities. We're mainly health, wellness, and education with a lot of community work that we do. But I would just kind of add to tag along what Carol and Gus said, is that last year was a record year for us in giving. And really since COVID, we've received like more and more requests each year. So the demand in the nonprofit world has really increased, at least from our perspective. I know I talked to Maria Kennedy about this too, but it's, I think, we've had a lot of discussion internally about how do we meet this need or how do we adjust our giving to more serve our community and state. So, it's kind of a challenge out there when you're getting swamped with more and more requests, and then to put on top of it the uncertainty with what's going on today. So it's a challenge, but I think we rely on a lot of our funding brothers and sisters we meet with and talk with. So events like this, you know, we really try to take good notes and try to listen well and see what's going on and try to respond as best we can.
Very helpful. Thank you, Tim. Those are all helpful to hear. You know, your priorities are still your priorities. You're looking at things cautiously, but being obviously aware and as part of the conversation, which I think is helpful for you and for all nonprofits. Tim, you did address the fact that your foundation has been receiving more requests, and I would love to hear from Carol and Gus kind of the answer to that question for them. You know, what are you seeing in terms of requests since January? Have you had much of that? How have your grant cycles lined up?
Well, we're on our second grant cycle right now out of 4. And we have more grant applications, I think, than we've ever had, but not a huge increase, but definitely a larger increase.
Yeah, I mentioned we had a record grant cycle, but our number of applications and amount has been growing also since around the time of the COVID crisis. So that's kind of been a trend. I will say, you know, part of what we were hearing in those applications was we would like to do this, or we're planning to do this, but it depends on whether we can retain this federal funding that was awarded, if we'll have these AmeriCorps volunteers or not. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty and being able to carry through those plans. And then toward the, end of the grant cycle, toward, the beginning of this month, I think organizations began to get some clarity, and often that meant we're not going to get those funds, or we're not going to have those AmeriCorps volunteers available. Sometimes it was, yes, we're continuing to get that funding. So, starting to hear some of that, and I think it will become a much clearer picture by our next cycle.
Thank you, and thanks for reiterating that. Okay, so next question is somewhat about your foundations, but also you as philanthropy leaders and just leaders of the nonprofit community in general and understanding donors. The question is, how are foundations and individuals helping meet the current needs? So what opportunities do you see for true collaboration among nonprofits? For example, collaborative fundraisers, mergers, et cetera. And these are literally questions from AAN membership, just to be clear to everybody on the webinar. What are y'all's thoughts?
I can jump in on that one. It's been really interesting what we're hearing from organizations and from our nonprofit leaders. We are thinking a lot about, because as Chris said, our funding is limited and we have to think about how to use it strategically to help organizations at this time. What does that look like? You're the ones who are doing the work in the community, in your organization, know what your needs are, and are thinking creatively about how do we adapt. So we're kind of listening to that as well. And I'm struck by how many people have said, we're looking at new ways to collaborate with organizations that do similar or complementary things. We're getting creative with our partners. In a few cases, I'm hearing from organizations, hey, we're really taking a serious look at merging. Now, most of those cases, those conversations had already been happening, but it's really put some urgency to that discussion. And some organizations are thinking, does this really make sense for us? I don't think we want to be in a position of pushing organizations toward a direction there that doesn't make sense for them, or is not kind of the right path. But, the fact that organizations are already thinking this way and getting creative about it, I'm really just in the mindset of how can we help support that exploration and the process of organizations making some changes if that does make sense for them, because if they're feeling the pinch financially and there's an opportunity programmatically to align work better, that's at least a silver lining of this situation, even though I know it's certainly painful and hard.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gus. Carol or Tim?
Hey, I thought Gus framed it well. I mean, we're all the time. I mean, you don't want to force people to collaborate, but really, if there's opportunities to, whatever that may look like, I think those are advantageous. I know we started or we'll have a new grant program this year called the Diamond Impact Awards. And one of the things we kind of stressed on that was we wanted folks to really collaborate and work on innovative ideas to address healthcare access in our state. So we encourage it, but like, it's kind of hard to force people to do it. But I mean, given the times we're in, I mean, I think innovative solutions to problems are welcome and helpful for sure.
Absolutely. Carol?
I would just say that the most of the collaborative agreements or efforts that I've seen have been not so much instigated by this funding, where we are in the funding picture right now, but really started before that. So I haven't really run across that much hearing new things, just maybe strengthening the arguments of those people who already felt like maybe collaboration or merging was a good idea.
Yeah.
Danielle, I want to just, I'm
Please,
sorry.
yeah. No, you're good.
I just want to add something. We actually, one of our 5 priorities is regional cooperation, and that is meant to foster municipal cooperation, but also inter-organizational cooperation. That is the priority under which we get the fewest applications. So there's an opportunity there. That came from the community. They said that's one of the 5 things we want you to focus on. So in our strategic planning process. So just know that there's a lane there for organizations that are thinking about this already or starting to build these collaborative efforts, that we do have a funding mechanism to support that.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I thank y'all for being honest and knowing that this is something that I think a lot of us have been encouraging of for a long time. It just feels a little more urgent now, perhaps, for some organizations. I also want to point out to folks on the call that AAN has a resource page, kind of resources during these changing times. And there is a section in there that says, would you like to have a conversation with another nonprofit, whether it's about, maybe sharing a program, maybe just sharing back office support. AAN loves to be a connector, and even if it's just a conversation. Again, there's no push here by us, by foundations, but just something for folks to think about. All right, thank y'all for answering that.
Hey, Danielle, just interjecting a question,
Great.
building off of, so Melissa Patrick asks, to what extent is the increase of what foundations are seeing due to new nonprofits entering into the ecosystem? Anybody have a sense of that?
I don't have any hard numbers, but I would say we've probably received in the last 2 years more requests from new organizations than in years prior. So it's probably a combination of organizations asking for increases in funding, and then new organizations they may not be new, so to speak, in their existence, but they may be new asking for funding from us.
And we've seen some increase, I guess, in new organizations that are coming to us. We seem to get them, in the last several years, we've seemed to get more organizations that are brand new than I remember our seeing in past years.
I'll just add, during COVID, we had more flexible funding and we did a lot of outreach. And so I think we connected with more new to us organizations, and some of those were new organizations and some were just new to us. But I think that fueled some of it. But we have seen that those applications steadily continue to climb. So I don't think we have really a full picture of the why.
Chris, thanks for that.
The other thing I'd point out, Danielle, and I don't know if this is true for the rest of y'all, but we also seem to get more applications from groups that we've had no conversation or contact from before. This has really been interesting to me in the last 2 years, that we've received more, I don't know what you'd call them, just applications.
Yeah.
no phone call, no first date, no nothing. They're just, and it's interesting to me. And some of them are really big asks. So I mean, I think that's one thing that, at least from our perspective, that I would suggest is that, a phone call or a conversation prior to a grant application can really go a long way, and or save you time. But I have been really surprised over the last 2 years at the number of organizations that we've heard from asking for pretty substantial amounts of money, and we've heard nothing from them ever before.
Wow,
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
interesting. First date's important, y'all, for sure. Okay, moving us along, I would like to shift focus just a little bit. I would like to hear from the panel the answer to this. So an executive order was recently drafted, but ultimately not issued, that targeted philanthropy, with particular focus on overseas grants and DEI grant making. Even though this EO was averted, do you anticipate philanthropy being a target moving forward?
I can jump in. It's a time of a lot of transition, so it's hard to know what's exactly is coming, but we know the sands are shifting in a lot of ways. So we're continuing to follow the situation, assess if there's anything we need to do. But for us, equity and inclusion is one of the 5 priorities in our strategic plan, and that was shaped by the community. That was one of the 5 things that emerged from talking with people across 5 counties, 5 pretty diverse counties. And so that'll be a key priority for us, through the additional 5 years of our current strategic plan, certainly. But, we address equity and inclusion in a broad range of ways. It's pretty expansive. And so I don't think that I wouldn't say we're currently very concerned about what we may need to do or worry about. I think we're just, continuing to watch what's going on at the federal level, what's happening in the foundation community, and continuing to look at how can we best serve nonprofits and the communities that they serve.
Thank you. Tim, Carol?
I would also point out that that I think that last week they, at least somewhere, they released in one of, I guess, part of the big bill, that they were increasing the excise tax on, which is what foundations pay on their earnings every year, and it has been a flat I think it's 1.39%, and they are now proposing that it will be based on total size, and some of the increases are beyond 10% and above. And I do think that, I believe that that's is politically motivated in certain ways. What I really worry about is that some of the money that comes out of the larger foundations, not all, I mean, they all fund for different purposes and different reasons, but I do worry a lot about some of the larger foundations who do a lot of work in medical research and other things like that, that will affect, at some point in time, all of us maybe. And I worry a lot about how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on that. I mean, I'm not sure about the target of philanthropy, but I mean, we're just willing to listen and move forward with that, I guess.
Gotcha. Yeah. I will say that Alabama Association of Nonprofits put out an action alert to members to reach out to our Republicans in the House to share their thoughts and ideas about the tax bill. And it was certainly concerning that federal funding is getting cut for nonprofits, and then also a tax potentially being put onto foundations makes it just really, really hard to do the work. So I just encourage everybody on the call to pay attention. If you're an AAN member, thank you. Please read the alerts, and thank you for the calls that you make. Last question for me, and then Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. This is perhaps in a similar vein too, but foundations have been impacted by a 2024 court ruling by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And of course, that's Georgia, Florida, Alabama. And it was prohibiting contracts based on race or gender. Has this ruling affected your approach to grant making? Gus, I know you spoke to this a little bit. If there was anything
Yeah.
else you wanted to share.
Sure. Well, like to that case specifically, I'll give my answer for our foundation and then to talk about that case a little bit. So, number one, none of our funding opportunities are strictly limited to a specific group. So we don't feel that currently, specific to that 11th Circuit case that we have any concerns or anything we need to do or consider doing differently. The case in Georgia resulted in a court injunction against the Fearless Foundation. Was actually settled by the foundation closing its Strivers Grant program, which was specifically for provided grants to Black women entrepreneurs. They closed that program, but they in several of their programs, but sort of shifted their focus to underserved entrepreneurs, which included Black women entrepreneurs. So by broadening a little bit, they're able to kind of continue that work. This is not a case that has gone to the Supreme Court. There have been Supreme Court precedents around First Amendment rights of private charities to fund as they see fit. So there's precedent there, but there's also the 2023 Supreme Court case barring affirmative action in public higher education institutions that in some ways was the predicate for the Georgia case. So, as it is with legal issues, it's hard to find a really definitive answer, and you're looking at different strands of precedent here. But I think, as I said, I think we are watching closely. Things could continue to evolve in this space, but I think for foundations that have some flexibility, even where they are targeting particular needs or parts of the community that are under-resourced or underserved, as long as there's some flexibility there, I think in terms of who and how they can fund, it's less of an issue.
I would agree with what Gus has said from our point of view, and we had a conversation about this as well. Our focus is around really helping all of our citizens enjoy economic mobility, and we think that education is the biggest part of that, or the biggest driver of that, and so it's and I think that we just want everyone who we can help climb the ladder to success. We want to help them in that climb, and that really defines more about who we fund and how we fund than anything else. So I guess if somebody has a problem with that, we'll hear about it.
Understood. Tim, do you have anything?
Yeah, they both said it well. We try to, like Carol says, we try to do things that improve the health, wellness, and education of citizens of Alabama. And we don't really, a lot of individual organizations may be doing certain work like for those groups, but we don't, say it has to be. But, just invariably with the work you're doing, you're going to help a lot of folks in some of those categories already. So, we, like Carol said, education, that's a big one for us just because so many things hinge on that, especially if you can get to folks at a young age and improve their education and outcomes. So I think it's just, like she said very well, I agree with that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Chris, are you ready? I have one more question I could ask, but
ask one more question, and then if people have questions, we don't have any additional questions in the chat, put them in the chat and we'll get to those. We've probably got about 15 more minutes on this before we turn it over to Ryan.
Okay, great. So another question I have is, like COVID, we had to pivot. Here we are pivoting again. And the question is, how easy or difficult is it for foundations to band together to align funding when facing a crisis? I think this is just from the AAN membership trying to understand how difficult or how easy is it to work together.
Well, I mean, I think we've had experience with that with, you know, the tornadoes in 2011, COVID. I mean, there's been several opportunities that we've come together and try to work out issues in the region and the state. So I mean, we've always been more than happy to join those and help solve issues in our state. So what do you think, Carol? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think that the funding group, but particularly in the Birmingham area, I can't say so much statewide, but particularly in the Birmingham area, has been pretty active in keeping each other apprised of kind of what their interests are and where they're going. We've done some co-funding over the years. I'm sure we will, but I also think that each foundation kind of brings their own view and focus to what they're working on. And so, do I think we will change a lot of our priorities? No, but do I think we will work with others to under the current circumstances to try to help the sector? Yes.
Thank you. And Gus, before you go, if I could ask Tim to just kind of peek behind the curtain for nonprofit leaders, would you talk a little bit about Alabama Giving so they understand that y'all have a community?
Yeah, so we have a group of funders across the state, from corporate foundations to community foundations, and we all get together 2 or 3 times a year and meet as a group. And Jara Stribling's kind of the admiral of that ship. She kind of leads it and kind of makes sure we all are on the right tracks. But we bring in speakers and we address different topics throughout the year. And we get to network with each other and kind of discuss things that we're doing as a group and learn from each other. But it's a chance to hear about what's going on in our state, because we get to meet with, people in Huntsville or Dothan or Mobile, Tuscaloosa, Anniston, wherever. So it's a good chance for us to try to, be good partners and really do things that benefit the state in a positive way.
Thank you. Gus, do you have anything to
I
add?
just say, just yes to everything Tim and Carol said. And to add, I think there is, we found it's really challenging, as different as foundations are, to consolidate funding in a moment of crisis. But there's so much value in sharing information, ideas, approaches, aligning our funding in some ways. And I think, there have been sort of tangible ways we brought funding together, as with long-term recovery committees during tornado recovery. And then during COVID, it was a little looser, but I think we did do a good job of staying really regularly in touch and making sure our funding was, geared toward having the greatest impact in a really difficult time. So I know we'll do that again. I agree. I think there are really good relationships across foundations in the region and the state, and we'll be well positioned that, with any situation that arises to respond and work together.
Great, thank you. This is just a reminder. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
No. I was just going to add to that, I think part of the challenge is when we came together as COVID, there's definitely a willingness, but foundations have different focus areas. So if you're a corporate foundation, it's really the sort of the priorities of that corporation, family, and then, even a community foundation has stakeholders, donors. And so kind of agreeing on a topic may be difficult for everybody, what we have found to get on board, because we all have different stakeholders. It just makes it more challenging, but definitely doable.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important to hear. I mean, I so appreciate the fact that you have a way, kind of a vehicle to get together and to talk and to share. Appreciate also the willingness, but also recognizing that, of course, you have your different mission, your different focus areas. I just wanted to take one moment before we maybe moved on to say that the Alabama Association of Nonprofits was interested in this conversation and having more. Should there be more questions about things, or there's something just for us to talk about as a community? the reason that AAN is interested in this is because we know there are changes. Like you, we are in communication with and training and growing with so many of you at one time, and knowing that changes to funding will change kind of the whole ecosystem. So we're trying to collaborate, kind of bring everybody together. And two of the things down the road, and we'll transition to this in a minute, but one is trying to identify that data, kind of what does the nonprofit sector look like in Alabama? What is it? Kind of where are we? But the maybe the more important piece is for all of us to be thinking about conversations that we can be having with our elected officials, with the media, with your own boards, with your neighbors, trying to help people understand what nonprofits are and how they are helpers. So this conversation is important because funding is always on our mind, and when a big cut is perhaps looming, we want to know what those other income streams are going to look like. So I hope this was helpful for you to hear from foundations, and we could have other conversations at other webinars down the road. So with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you if you have anything else.
Sure. There's a couple questions in the chat. One from Josephine Lowry from College Choice. Welcome, Josephine. With the increase in funding requests, how will you handle organizations who ask for funding for multiple years?
Josephine,
Go ahead, Carol.
Josephine, I would say it's not so much the increase in the number of requests we're getting right now. I think we've been doing multi-year funding. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But I think right now the biggest question for me is going to be, I think we're still trying to sort out. We would probably be less inclined to do multi-year funding right now because of the wait and see of how severely impacted all the different groups going to be. So we're going to be less likely to commit a couple of years out until we have a better picture of how widespread the impact of these federal funds, the federal cuts, is going to look like.
That's good. Those are good points, Carol. We also have done multi-year funding for many years, and it's less of an issue for us. I'm more concerned about the absolute pool of funding that we have available and the growing demand. And so we're not always able to meet the need that organizations come to us with, even given that we always do partial funding of a project, but we may have to cut back. And so whether it's a single year or multi-year, that's always a challenge.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Tim, anything?
I mean, they said it really well. I would just say that we don't do a lot of multi-year. Most of the time it's going to be from folks we know very well, and they're doing something special that would facilitate that. But we don't make people roll off either. So, you can continue to get funding from us year after year without having to roll off, as long as you're, as long as we're all in agreement what you're doing is good. So that's how I would couch that.
Great. This one's from Catherine Fry. This is really, I think, more for you, Gus. In terms of funding the underserved, their foundation assists patients in need in the service areas, and they have to meet financial requirements. How best to ask for funding from the community foundation? Is there patients in need of help that cross multiple areas?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, why don't we come back? Can you, Catherine, maybe if you can clarify that, and we'll come back to that. This one's from Brian. I hear it's essential to compile valid information and educate legislators and decision makers about the vital roles, the services of nonprofits in our state, what they provide. Welcome leadership from our trusted foundations to complete this work. We're going to talk, actually, I'm going to introduce Ryan in just a second, but he's going to talk a little bit more about that, and totally agree that we need people to understand the value that the nonprofit sector provides. Do you have a sense of how all of this information and the challenges may affect individual giving to nonprofit organizations and foundations? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just briefly, I'll say, I think the kind of um, work that AAN is doing to look at how the nonprofit sector is impacted and the work that Parker's doing to, assess or highlight the impact of the sector and how important it is. I think all of that is important for individual donors too, to understand. They're trying to get their heads around this just like we are. Most of them, are charitably minded already and want to support good work. Um, they're also concerned that they don't have the capacity to fill a gap in a substantial way, but could potentially do more. I've been heartened by the story of the Alabama Humanities Alliance and both the national funder that's helped humanities councils in many states, all states, and a local funder had made substantial commitments to support them this year. So that does happen, but I don't know. I think just to, it is going to be important to get that information out there and tell that story. And we certainly try to, be a conduit for that for donors who have funds at our foundation and to spread the story more widely.
And I would just add to that, Joan's question. I think a lot of personal giving really depends on two things: stock market and the tax code. And both of those, well, the stock market is going through a lot of fluctuations, and when people get nervous, they tend to be a little bit more hesitant on giving. And then the tax code, whether it's going to promote more giving, sort of, could be dependent on the amount of the tax deduction, who's itemizing, how many people are itemizing. So those all have sort of a trickle down effect on individual giving. And so we're in sort of an uncertain period right now. And so we're not really sure sort of what the effects will be. Tim, Carol, anything to add on that?
No, ma'am. No, sir.
I would love to add something just from my AAN point of view, and we talk about this in our Nonprofit Executive Leadership Institute, and it is that your relationships are critical. I agree with everything Chris said. Tax code and the economy certainly affect the way people give, but I think if you kind of hole up in your office and you're just, staying off the street, so to speak, you're not talking to people there to not understand what it is you're still doing, how important it is, and you're not learning who a new person may be who would like to support you. I'm always hopeful. I have that in me. I was a fundraiser for a long time, and so hopeful that you will find more people who can help you. It is going to be difficult. I mean, no need to candy coat it, but I think that if we stop the relationships, stop talking to board members and neighbors and all those folks, that will only hurt us. So I think it is to be determined, though.
Well, great. Well, thanks. Well, at this point, why don't we turn it over to Ryan Hankins, who is Executive Director of PARCA, our nonpartisan, nonprofit data guru, everything having to do with data. We at the Community Foundation have utilized PARCA for a number of the studies that we have done, the biggest one being on regional cooperation. So they've been a really trusted partner. We've been with AAN talking to Ryan about PARCA potentially doing something on our nonprofit sector to really show the value of what the nonprofit, what it adds to our economy, to our safety net, because it is about telling our story, and a lot of people just aren't aware of that. So Ryan, we'd love for you to kind of address the group and give us what your thinking is along this topic.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. It's nice to see 5 of you and to see 140 some odd abbreviations. So I hope you're well. And I will attempt to do what Chris said and not nerd out too much. I hope you're all familiar with PARCA at some level. If not, I've put our website in the chat so you can go and take a look and see all the work we're doing in data and policy research and what have you. So what I'm going to do for a minute is just talk very briefly about this project we're putting together to touch on some of the things that have been discussed today, and then ask you to think about it and then give me some feedback now and or maybe even easier after the call. This is not meant to be a vanity project. It's meant to be something that will help all of us. PARCA is a nonprofit also. Help all of us do our work better and make our case, understand our case, and make it better to those audiences that are increasingly important right now. And the focus of our project, as Chris said, is really trying to understand not just the impact, the scale and size and scope and economics of the sector in the state and our cities and counties, but the degree to which the state, the cities and counties are dependent on the sector. I suspect every one of you would agree that, or you've all come across those who explicitly or implicitly really think of the nonprofit sector as something that's nice and kind and sweet and do-gooders and on the margins doing things that are lovely but not really critical to day in, day out life. And that's fundamentally untrue. That is not understood by politicians. It's not understood by funders. It's often not understood by many nonprofit leaders themselves. We are in a society that has designed itself in a way that the nonprofit sector is critical to the functioning of society. So I will nerd out for a minute, not on numbers, but on history. So think back to the Depression, when the federal government was small and did not do a whole lot, and all the action happened in city and state governments. That changed radically in the Depression, and the federal government took on a much larger role in all parts of society. And we're still arguing about it now. In the 60s, that role expanded again with a major change of the federal government beginning to shift responsibilities to nonprofits, even creating nonprofits to do some of the work it had done previously. And then that process only increased again in the 70s and 80s. And so much of what we look back in that time period as the downsizing of government was not downsizing, it was shifting. So government responsibilities and government funding shifted to the nonprofit sector. And that's the dynamic that we've operated in that continuum for about a century now. We have a society that presumes a vital and active nonprofit sector to design and deliver significant amounts of public services and arts and culture and things beyond just the human services universe. So the work that we do individually and collectively is not an add-on. It's critical to the day in and day out functioning of society. That is not understood by nearly enough people. And when you read and you see things of nonprofits, certain nonprofits have all of their funding from the government. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That may be by design. That's the way we built the system. At the moment, we are rethinking that entire system, to put it charitably. The real challenge we face is the funding for those services may be changing, but not the expectation that those services be provided. And citizens and residents' demands for those services are not changing. So we have a real political and economic problem that we're about to walk into. So our focus on this report is in as limited but compelling of language as possible, say what I just said to you about the centrality of the nonprofit sector, as what some have said, third-party governance. We do what government does in some countries and what business does in other countries. In the US, the nonprofit space does it. And the people expect those things to be done. So how can we explain that in as compelling and honest and fair, but compelling and short of language as possible? Then expound on the things that we know and that you know broadly, but we don't tell very well. The size of our sector in the state, the economics of the sector, the number of employees in the sector, the money coming through the sector, and explain the value we're providing in dollars and cents terms into the state and its economy. And then explain things that we learn and explain things we don't know so well. Exactly how much of the totality of services are coming from the nonprofit space, meaning of all healthcare provided in Alabama, how much is coming from nonprofits? Of all of education or education enrichment, how much is coming from nonprofits? Of all of human services, arts, music, how much is coming from the nonprofit sector, to make that much more apparent first to ourselves so we can understand it and tell that story, and then to the stakeholder groups that we really care about: funders, volunteers, state and local and federal politicians and leaders. What we really have to understand better is that even though some of us personally like the idea that nonprofits are an alternative to government, and sometimes we are an alternative to government, we are also, in fact, in many cases, partners with government. And that was made very clear with the numbers that Danielle showed. So if we as a sector are partners with government, we have been for 100 years anyway. One, how do we tell that story better? Two, how to do it effectively? And three, how might we move forward if that relationship begins to change in meaningful ways? So we want to understand better who we are, better what we're doing and how our sector in Alabama is structured and compares to other states, the role that we play in closing the safety net gap in Alabama, and then how much money we're actually bringing in from federal sources and from national philanthropic sources to make a much more compelling picture of the sector for our state and local leaders and our funders, both here and around the country. What I need from you are a few things. One, give me some feedback on those concepts broadly. And the next few hours to 24 hours, Danielle or Chris will send out a kind of a summary, a one-pager of what we're looking at, the questions we're asking, the things that we want to know. I'd invite you to share your feedback on that document. Share with me other things that you would like to know. What questions do you have? They might not all be answerable, but I'd like to try. And then share with me, what are you gleaning from the circles that you run in? My entire career, I have heard it said, nonprofits are so much more efficient than government. Nonprofits don't waste money. Now I'm hearing those nonprofits are not very efficient. They waste a lot of money. That's a sea change. I would like to hear those things. So I'd be very interested to hear the questions you are handling, the comments, the questions you're picking up at the Rotary Club, at church, at the baseball game, from board members. You know, what's the pulse of the universe you're hearing, and how can that inform the questions that we are asking at PARCA, and how we can provide some research and some verbiage and numbers back to the association, the foundations, and all of us to be better advocates for our work.
Thanks, Ryan. And I know we're running up on time here, so we'll communicate out to Ryan's working up a draft of a proposal, and it's really ultimately about us as a nonprofit sector telling our story and telling it more effectively with data, and so people understand the importance. So we'll keep you informed. Danielle, we'll get something out and get feedback on that. And, you know, just in closing, I would say that we as foundations, we're only as good and as strong. The same thing for this Alabama Nonprofit Association, is that we're only as good as the strength of our nonprofit sector. You all are the boots on the ground, and we can't do our work without you all doing your work. And so it's this this exchange between both of us is vital, the relationship that we have. We're hoping that if we move forward with this report, that this is something that you all, it'd be really helpful for you all to make your case to donors and to legislators. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then we would love to entertain the opportunity of doing something like this quarterly, potentially, if this is something that's helpful to you all. So let either Danielle, myself, or Gus know if this is something you'd like to continue, and what potential topics would be, because we're here to really to serve you all. So again, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our panelists, Carol, Tim, Gus. Really appreciate you participating in this. Danielle, you and the association for all the great work that you do, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all for participating in the call. Take care, everyone.